Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to another episode of the No BS Human Design Podcast. I am fresh off our retreat and I feel incredible. It was amazing. My husband picked me up at the airport and we're a few minutes into the drive home and he's like, "You just feel so zen right now." And I've thankfully been able to carry that into a lot of my week when I came home, which thank God I did because then my husband had to leave for work. So he was out of town. Our nanny is out for a procedure. She's okay, by the way. And then the kids, all three got sick, two of which had pink eye. And thankfully, I was still very much in retreat mode where I felt like I carried everything through the week really well. I also didn't book too much for work, so I was able to just be with the kids most of the time. I knew when I came back from this retreat that I'd need some time to decompress, and I'm so thankful I did that so that I could take care of the rest of the house until the full moon in Taurus hit. And then that sent me on a bit of a spiral. But we're going to talk about that at a later date because I had an ancestral healing ceremony done with my sister and my grandmother and this wonderful woman who is a local friend of mine. And we'll have her on the podcast at some point soon to talk about it. But yeah, it's been like a whirlwind since I came home a week ago now. And I was supposed to record a different episode for this week, but the energy just wasn't there with the kids being sick and all that. And I was like, you know what? I think this episode needs to air right now because we're moving into Thanksgiving and then Christmas. And so I moved this episode that you're about to hear up in the queue because it makes sense why I wasn't able to record something different because this is the one that you needed to hear this week. I don't even know how I didn't think of putting this sooner and just moving it up earlier because it is all about burnout and stress management. And I have an incredible expert on with me named Ellyn Schinke. First of all, when we first met, I was like, I just want to dive into all the science of this because if you don't already know, my background is actually in science. I went to school for veterinary. And as spiritual as I probably seem these days, I love having everything that I can backed in science and finding whatever research I can to support the things that I believe in or I'm finding to be true. So when I was connected with Ellyn through a mutual friend, we had just the most epic conversation. And I was like, I feel like I need to have you on the podcast because we talk about burnout from the scientific standpoint and something we talk about a lot in my work because it's all energy, right? Energy dynamics and how you're using your energy. So today we are talking to Coach Ellyn, who is a burnout coach and corporate wellness consultant. She's a former research scientist turned #1 burnout and stress management coach on Google. She's the creator of the Burnout Proof Business Program and host of the Burnout Proof podcast. She's been featured in places like Fast Company, the New York Times, and on stage with LinkedIn. And she really teaches individuals and organizations how to create sustainable success through their mindsets, through their systems, through their self-care, so they can work less and live more. So not only are we diving into the 4 types of burnout and navigating things like emotional burnout, but we also get to deconstruct the burnout that happened to me, which actually is why literally where my group program Revive Your Sacral birthed out of. It was my functional burnout experience and how I healed that. So we get to touch on the science of burnout and what's happening in your body. And we circle back to what actually happened to me because I always said I didn't feel like I was doing too much physically. I don't understand how I burnt out. I had theories about like what happened in my mind and my husband losing his job and the anxiety, but I never had any research that could back it up. And on this episode, you will hear that light bulb moment where Ellyn actually validates everything that I thought happened from a scientific standpoint. And we talk about all the different types of burnout, which are just crazy. Like most of these aren't being validated by doctors. So if this sounds like it's something that you need moving into the holiday season, which probably most of us, if not all of us, do, please grab a notebook and pen or something to take notes with because this is something that will be so, so beneficial for you to pay attention to as we're moving into the holidays, which is really, it really needs to be more about enjoying the holidays and presence and pleasure and less about like the getting of the gifts and the stressful hosting and how can we make this more pleasurable for us, right? So, yes, we usually talk about this kind of thing from the energy dynamics and human design standpoint, but today we're adding in the element of science-backed research and actual burnout within the body. So, if you're a nerd like me, you're going to really enjoy this one. I already can't wait to listen back to it. Like I said, take notes, get all the details that you need, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Ellyn and let us know your thoughts or questions or whatever came up. And of course, all her contact info will be in the show notes below. So reach out to her. And then I will make you one of my special spicy episodes for next week. All right. I love you so much. Enjoy. Bye for now. Welcome to the No BS Human Design Podcast. I'm Adriana, human design coach and motivational speaker. I went through my quarter life crisis in my 20s and had to learn how to navigate through finding what I was meant to be doing with my life. I refused to believe in the culture that said we were all meant to have the same path and boring careers until we retire and die. And along my journey, I found human design, a system that reveals your energetic blueprint, showing you where and how to access your body's consciousness and how to live as your true self. Human design changed my life, so I started sharing it with others and changing their lives, but we were all finding the same problem: a lack of resources that explain the system in easy and useful ways. So I created this show where we dive deep into the lessons of the human design system without the BS and the noise you find on the internet. Listen in for lessons in human design, finding your purpose, manifestation and spiritual practices, human design within business, and so much more. We connect with other experts in the human design and spiritual realm in a refreshingly honest way to help you find your way along your spiritual path and live this life with intention. It's time to let go of the societal expectations of being and let yourself find abundance through being uniquely you. Let's get started. Well, hello, beautiful friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am so good. I really needed your energy today. I was just like, Thursdays are my Fridays, and I was like, oh, I am late tired. And then now I'm like awake again. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I feel like today is a Friday because I'm only working for a little bit today and then I'm going to go hang out with my nephews tonight.
Oh,
So, yeah,
fun. Oh, that'd be so nice. I mean,
it'd be very
assuming
fun.
your nephews are fun. That was a
Oh,
big.
yes, they're fun. I mean, one of them's a COVID baby. And so he has his COVID baby tendencies, but they're both
Yes,
an
I
aunt.
have COVID children. Yes. Amazing. I would love for you to take a second to introduce yourself. Like, who is Ellyn?
Oh my gosh. I
Mhm.
am really consciously trying not to answer that question by being like, this is my title and this is kind of the business I do.
Yep.
Even though that is a huge part of who I am, I would say, who is Ellyn? Ellyn is definitely like a recovering people pleaser and a recovering
Mhm.
perfectionist. She's a high achiever. She's somebody who has 80 bajillion hobbies. And I always say I'm like team never bored, like only boring people get bored. Like I am totally that person because I do photography and I like to paint and I have literally a full-size electric keyboard sitting right next to me and I sing and I do all of these things. But given that, I was an athlete growing up. I played a bunch of soccer. I played soccer until I was in my early 20s and then my knees broke and I had to stop playing soccer. So I've always been this person who did 80 bajillion things. And so naturally because of that, now I do burnout and stress management coaching. So that is my thing. That is I live and breathe burnout and stress management. I love it because it's kind of the perfect intersection of all of the different things that I enjoyed coaching on and that I felt like I could support people in my coaching, but bringing it together in a really, really meaningful way. So
Mhm.
that is how I would answer who is Ellyn.
And I love that. I feel like a lot of people who are listening will naturally hear how much you do or have done at any given point in time and think that you're a generator type, which is like the very energetic, do a lot of things, go, go, go types.
I've
But you
been
are not.
asked that before. Are you a generator? And yeah.
Yes. So tell us for a moment, what is your human design?
I am a projector. I am not a
Sure.
generator. And you know
Mhm.
the details of the rest of it because I don't.
Ellyn is a 6'2" emotional projector. So I will say, looking at her chart, she does have two motors defined. So she would technically be classified as an energy projector. because although you do not have that sacral energy that generators have, which is like their
Hmm.
battery that just keeps running in most cases, you
Hmm.
actually have two other energy centers that will keep you going and give you pressure, give you emotional drive, all of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and then what's your top three in astrology, which I also have pulled up if you forget.
I have forgotten, but I wrote them down, so I'm pulling up. I mean, I'm a Taurus. We were bonding about the fact that we were only born like a couple days apart.
Yep.
And then my rising, I'm Cancer rising, and then Virgo moon.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so now we just learned a lot about her just through her human design or her astrology. Love this. Okay, so when we first met, I mean, before we realized we were born 4 days apart from each other, we were actually bonding over burnout because
Yeah.
maybe not everyone who listens to this knows already, but I went to school for science. I was in school for veterinary. So everything that I do and teach, I also love having a scientific component to it. Like my brain naturally
Mm-hmm.
wants to understand the science. I love getting
Mm-hmm.
test results back that also complement what my Ayurvedic coach told me. Like I love
Mm-hmm.
seeing both. And you do work in burnout, in and around
Mm-hmm.
burnout, and you take a lot of the science that you've learned with you into that. So it's not just about hearsay, essentially, or like
Yeah.
talking, like therapy. Like there's so
Mm-hmm.
much depth to that. And you
Mm-hmm.
had a previous life, quote, in something scientific, right?
Yes, yeah, I actually was getting my PhD when I stumbled into coaching. Because I kind of always feel like for a lot of us, and maybe this resonates with you too, I feel like we all get to a point where the ways in which we operated when we were younger no longer work. And that was
Mm.
kind of grad school for me. I mean, shoot, you can hear me talk about like all of the things that I do. I've been like that my entire life. Like I was that in high school. I did 4 years of varsity soccer, like all AP classes. I did musical theater, voice coaching, piano lessons. Like I did all of those things. And then I did the same thing again when I was in college. And so I hit the wall when I was in grad school and I didn't know what to do about it. So I kind of did what a lot of people do when they're going through burnout or like very chronic stress. And I started Googling. And Google was maddeningly unhelpful. It was like a lot of work less, sleep more, quit your job. And I was just like, all right, thanks, Captain Obvious. Like Dr. Google, very unhelpful this time around. It didn't tell me I had cancer, but it did tell me, these just cookie cutter things. And
Where
so I
was
was just
Chat
like, I
GPT when you needed it?
exactly though, even Chat GPT, I've been actually trying to train a Chat GPT. This is a side tangent. I've been trying to train a Chat GPT to be like an Ask a Burnout coach.
Yes.
TBD on that. It's kind of sort of working, kind of sort of not. It's still very just surface level. Even as much as I try to train it with like my content and my knowledge, it's very
Mhm.
surface level. But yeah, like it's just that was what I was running into. So I was just kind of like, I'm a scientist. Like I have a bachelor's degree in microbiology and genetics. I went to get my PhD in microbiology and immunology. So for those listening, just nerdy science stuff. I studied bacteria and viruses. That's what I studied. And I still am thoroughly like interested and fascinated by them. But I hit a point where I was emotionally exhausted, I was mentally exhausted, I was physically exhausted, and I didn't know what to do about it. And the long story short is I realized that I was on this path that when I always say I looked up the ladder, I looked up the people above me, the graduate students that were ahead of me, my mentor. And as much as they were excited and loved what they were doing with their life, I just didn't see myself there. Like I kind of spent a decade at that point preparing for a future that I no longer saw myself in. But I was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I was trying to make it work because there was so much sunk cost and there were so many people that were proud of me for the path I was pursuing. And there's an inherent respect when you say you're a scientist or that you're getting a PhD. So I had a lot of trouble letting that go and it led to a lot of emotional burnout. And then because I wasn't doing anything about that, I was kind of trying to numb by working, which led to overwhelm. And because I didn't do anything about that, I physically burned myself out. Like we're going to talk today about the 4 types of burnout. I had 3 of them when I was in grad school. But as I like taught myself and worked through it myself, I started teaching people what I was learning on the health side, on the personal growth and the clarity side. And that's kind of how Ellyn as a coach was born. It threw a monkey wrench into my life, but shoot, 10 years later, I'm like so grateful for it.
I feel very similar with my own functional burnout because it birthed an entire group program that I have since
Mhm.
helped a lot of women heal through. So it sucked, yeah. And I think I'm still actually recovering. Like, how long does it actually
Mhm.
take someone to recover from a true burnout?
Ooh, that's a good question. So burnout's a spectrum. Like everything that we're going to talk about today, everybody's kind of got to take into consideration like how deep into it are you? Because there's very mild burnout that you can bounce back from in the matter of like a couple weeks,
Put it this
couple
way, I
months.
had like no cortisol. Like I was constantly me, and then there's like a little beep. That was
Isn't
it.
that that's a really good point because I feel like a lot of us, and I've made this mistake in the past too, we think that burnout is about your cortisol being too high, but it's almost like burnout happens because you burned your adrenals out. Like you burned your hormones out. Like your hormones are not functioning the way they should be. And it tends to be like actually you're depleted in your
Yeah.
cortisol, which is really interesting about burnout. But yeah, so if you're like that, that can take several years to recover
Interesting.
from fully, especially because we this is where what I do I think is so important and why I like how I approach it. I'm biased, obviously. But like it's can take years to recover from because for so many of us that get to that point, we have mindsets, habits, behaviors that are driving us toward overworking ourselves and overloading ourselves. And it is hard. Like it's not like you can take a break from life to fix it oftentimes, especially if you're an entrepreneur or especially if you're like a single parent. Like we can't take a pause button on life. There's still going to be these other stressors coming in. So we can make lots of lifestyle changes, but inevitably you're going to hit a season where things are going to like kind of blip again.
Yep.
And then you can make positive lifestyle changes and it's going to blip again. So if we were able to just fully pause life, stop working, have zero stressors, I'm sure it wouldn't take us that long to recover from the kinds of burnout you were experiencing. But we can't. Life's still gonna life in the background, and that's why it can take that long to bounce
Mm,
back from.
thank you for that because I've had that thought in my mind a lot. I was like, I went through a phase where I felt optimal again, and then
Mm-hmm.
it seemed to kind of like even out, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's slowly still getting better, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't feel optimal. I had that hit real quick, and then it's kind of definitely not as bad as I was
Mm-hmm.
though. So I'm still getting
Yeah.
better. Yes.
Yeah. Especially because for so many of us, like we were talking before this, we started recording about like the normal, like what is our normal. For so many of us, our normal is like not normal. Like it is
Mm-hmm.
hustling, it is overloaded calendars, it is us operating what is essentially at pedal to the metal constantly.
Yep.
And so for a lot of us, we don't know how to live and what life is like without
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. And then so you went through this and then you also
Mhm,
have all this scientific knowledge. What were
mhm.
you finding? Like without going like too in depth, what was the research and the science supporting that led you to being like, I need to teach everyone about this?
Oh gosh. Okay. So like for example, there's small like we say breathing strategies and I feel like a lot of people roll their eyes when people are like, "Oh, you just need to breathe." There are actually some breathing strategies that are like clinically documented to dramatically
Yep.
decrease stress levels. We're talking lower cortisol, we're talking like blood pressure, like all of these different like physiological implications of doing a breathing strategy. There's one that I love called a physiological sigh that gained a ton of popularity because of a podcaster who's also a neuroscientist out of, I think, Stanford. He popularized it like in kind of the modern times. It's called a physiological sigh. And it is literally something that we can do like one, maybe two times. So, like, we're talking the span of like a minute or two. That is one of the most well documented ways to lower your stress in the moment.
Is it just like an actual like breathe in and then
Well, it's kind of this. You take an extended as much as you can inhale through your nose. You want to try to get to the point where your lungs feel like they're full. And then you take a very small additional inhale. So you have like this one long inhale, a little additional inhale, and then a long exhalation until you fully emptied your lungs. So
mm,
it's kind of, I always equate it to this is an example he used to use on his podcast too. Like when you see kids like have that absolutely hyperventilating cry and they
yes.
sort of do this
Yeah.
thing to try to calm themselves down. They do this double inhale thing to calm themselves back down. That's what it is.
Mm,
It's equilibrating the oxygen to carbon dioxide balance in your
love
blood.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So just for anyone listening, because I love giving them more tools, how many times did you say like you just do it within like a minute or two? Should they do that?
1 to 2 times, 1 to 2 times, and it's gonna dramatically lower
That's
your stress in the
incredible.
moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So like stuff like that, there's like certain like body movements that are linked to cortisol reduction. So like doing a seated calf raise, so like just sitting at your desk and like going up on your toes and back down, that's been had some stress benefits. But also I remember feeling very validated initially when I started looking into the research. Like I would do things like every week I would do a weekly review and I would kind of look back at my week, and I still do this, and I would ask myself like what worked, what didn't work, and what can I improve, kind of almost self-reflective and taking an inventory on the stressors and the preventers of the last week of my life. When I was reading the research, researchers do something almost exactly like that called a stress inventory with people who are there trying to lower their stress levels, and it's been shown to help as well. So it was like very validating to see that some of these things that I had been doing that I just had anecdotal evidence for actually aligned really, really nicely with some of the things that I was seeing in the research.
Oh, so cool. I love that. Like I could just geek out about this stuff all day, but not everyone
Right?
wants to
Me
hear
too.
this. So let's figure out, tell us about the four types of burnout.
Yes, yes. So I will always, and I always enter this kind of with the caveat of this is how I see burnout. This is not like the World Health Organization's
Mm.
definition or the CDC's definition. The World Health Organization actually says that burnout is only occupational and does not apply to other areas of life, which, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Right? Right? Every time I tell people that, they're just like freaking seriously. Like even like therapists and psychologists are just like, yeah, no. So that's how they see it. This is how I see it. And what I will say is three of the four types of burnout actually align very, very nicely with the World Health Organization's definition of like burnout criteria. So the four types of burnout are emotional, overwhelm, physical, and boredom burnout. Those are the four types. I
Mm.
know the boredom one catches a lot of people off guard. The other three, not so much.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So, like physical burnout, I like to start with that one because that's, I feel like, what we typically think of when we think of burnout. It's that depth of physical exhaustion. But like when you're in physical burnout, it's you're so tired and so exhausted by just what you have on your plate that it doesn't feel like any amount of sleep or rest is going to be enough. Like you could sleep 12 hours Friday, Saturday, Sunday and still wake up Monday morning and feel like you didn't rest at all. So
Mm.
that's kind of the depth that we're talking about there. But what it can also look like is it can look like changes in your basic self-care pattern. So maybe you're not getting hungry in the morning, which that is another sign of your
I had
cortisol
that.
levels.
Yep.
Yeah. I struggle with that still to this day. I have
Mhm.
to like force myself to eat in the morning because I feel like in a lot of ways, especially in entrepreneurship, don't get me started on burnout and entrepreneurship. That's why I like to help business owners. But like yeah, so like that is a sign that can happen. Also, just like your sleep patterns being off, or like you used to be a morning person and now you're seeing like your energy is just not there in the morning. So those shifts, but it can also be getting sick more frequently. That tends to be how physical burnout shows up for me. And it makes a ton of sense because stress and our immune system are very
Hmm.
interconnected.
Yep.
So, like when you are super stressed out, your immune system gets run down. And fun
Hmm.
fact, that was my background. I literally studied immunology, microbiology, and immunology. So, the study of
Hmm.
your immune system. So, that's the physical side. Definitely huge, definitely preventable. And then the next one, overwhelm burnout, is like the productivity side. When we are mentally exhausted, it usually ties back to overwhelm burnout in some way. So, this is analysis paralysis. Like you can't turn your brain off at night when you're trying to fall asleep, or like when you're in social situations. Yep. When you're in social situations, you can't turn your brain off. Like the difficulty making decisions or like getting started on something or finishing something. Note there is like some elements of this that might overlap a little bit with people who have learning differences, ADHD. Like we're mostly with stuff like that talking about a shift from normal. So if you're usually like a get shit done human, like you have no problem finishing the stuff that's on your plate, and then you see that shift, that's more what we're looking for. Not necessarily somebody who has ADHD and just consistently has struggled with getting stuff done and focusing and locking in. So there is some caveat to those signs. And then I also tell people in overwhelm burnout to look out for absolute language. We tend to, when we are veering toward overwhelm burnout, using like a lot of always, never, every, all, like, my God,
Yep.
every day is the same old shit. Like every client just doesn't respect my boundaries. Like that kind of defeated, like negative
Hmm.
language can be very associated with
Oh my
overwhelm
God.
burnout.
So far I think I had three out of the four types of burnout all at once, but go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. yeah, me too. Me too. So I inevitably always get the question of, can you have more than one type at once? Yes, you can. But what I always tell people is there's usually one that's driving the other. Like the example I gave in grad school, for me, it was emotional burnout. And I'll give that example after I talk about what emotional burnout is. So
Okay.
what emotional burnout is, it's the fulfillment side of burnout. There, in the World Health Organization definition, they call it emotional exhaustion. So, but what I usually tell people to look for with this is emotional reactivity, quick to anger, quick to tears. I cannot tell you how many clients I've worked with who they can't even get through explaining what's going on and why they sought me out without breaking down into
Mhm.
tears. Like, I
Or my
think that
husband
happens to
asked
a
me a
lot of,
question and I'm just like,
Mhm.
ah, I
Yep, yep.
can't. Yeah.
And I definitely feel like there is, again, there's something to that on a grand scale. It's not just a week out of the month where you're like
Mhm.
that, right? We're not
Right.
talking about PMSing here. Like,
Yes.
I've been PMSing lately and I've been very emotional. That's not what we're talking about here. But that's emotional reactivity is a big part. Another thing to look out for is social isolation, because when we are in emotional burnout, when we are emotional reactive, right, like that, we don't want to burden other people with what's going
Mhm.
on in our lives. So we isolate ourselves.
Mhm.
Like, I was the social chair of my graduate department, and then I was like a hermit, and I like never hung out with any of my old friends anymore. So that's kind of what we're talking about. But then perhaps the some of the biggest things are numbing behaviors, and then apathy and disinterest, and just kind of feeling jaded
Mhm.
about the world and business and life and whatnot. But the numbing behaviors one I think is really interesting, because we can numb, like humans are like professional numbers. We're so good at finding ways to like numb and not deal with our emotions. We numb with the crappy reality TV show that we watch, we have no idea why we watch it, but we watch it. Like, we numb with food and
Mhm.
alcohol. We numb
Mhm.
with very productive things as well, like work and exercise.
Mhm.
All of those can be numbing behaviors if we're using them to escape. And that's what I was doing in grad school. So I was fundamentally unfulfilled by the path that I was pursuing. I didn't feel a lot of connection to it anymore. And because I didn't want to accept that, I started doing all of these things. I like started a side hustle. I was in a dual degree program. I was getting a master's and a PhD
Oh
simultaneously.
my
I
God.
like joined Michigan Science Writers and started doing science communication and like writing science articles. So I overwhelmed myself as a numbing behavior as a
Mhm.
result of the emotional burnout. And then because I didn't do anything and I didn't stop doing the things that I was involved in, I ended up physically burning myself out because I didn't have enough time to like rest
Yep.
and recover. So you can absolutely have multiple types of burnout simultaneously. So those are our first three. Boredom burnout, I separate because it's an offshoot of emotional burnout, but the causality is different. And that's why I think it's so important to separate. So, like emotional burnout, fundamentally, that is about fulfillment. Boredom burnout is fundamentally about a lack of stimulation, engagement,
Mm.
novelty, challenge in your day to day life, whether we're talking work or personal life. It's you're uninterested. The things that you are doing and the ways in which you are spending your time, you do not find interesting. And it takes a lot of energy to engage ourselves in things that we don't find interesting. So that's kind of where the boredom side comes in. So that's a lot of like, if you feel like you're fundamentally going through the motions day in and day out, that's where boredom burnout can start to come in. So that was my long drawn out answer to the four types
So
of
I'm very
burnout.
curious, and I'm gonna say this is a trigger warning for anyone listening with anything who gets sensitive around mental health topics. I'm very curious what you see the difference is between the boredom, burnout, and depression, because depression presents like that in me.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I've never had somebody explicitly tie it to boredom burnout, but they'll overarchingly say, what is the difference between the emotional sides of
Mm,
burnout and depression? And how I think of it, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health counselor or a therapist, but how I think of it is I have a lot of friends who have depression and anxiety, and they always explained it to me with the spoon analogy. Do you know the spoon
I don't
analogy?
think so.
So, how they explained this analogy to me is, let's say like a normal person who doesn't have depression or anxiety, they have 12 spoons over the course of their day, and they can delegate those 12 spoons out to the various
Oh,
different things that they have over the course of their day. Work gets 6 spoons, their kids get 3 spoons, and then they have 3 spoons left over to dedicate to themselves. Somebody who has depression or anxiety fundamentally just has less spoons. So instead of having 12, they might have 6. And so if work takes 3 or 4 of those spoons and their kids take the rest, they've got nothing else to be able to give to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Where burnout, I think, is different is my understanding of depression and anxiety has always been that there is a when you get to that point, especially when it's severe, there's almost like you get so into it, so deep into it that there's not a lot of capacity left over to change. And that's why it can be so debilitating because you can get stuck in it because that capacity to get yourself out of it isn't there.
Okay.
And with burnout, I don't find that to be the case. Usually there is more of a motivation to get out of that place than with, and that could be a chemical thing. Like I don't necessarily know of it, but that's kind of how I would differentiate it is I feel like depression is a very, very severe end of this. It's almost like beyond the severe end of burnout is when you start to get in depression because I feel like the chemicals change in your body when you're at that point. And I wouldn't say that's the case with burnout, but I will say I could be completely wrong. I think this is part of the reason why burnout is not considered to be a medical diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
as of yet. Like you can't go to your doctor and say, "Hey, I think I'm burned out, diagnose me." They might look at your hormones or look at for some comorbidities like anxiety or like ADHD or like some of these other things. But I think that's part of the reason it's not a medical diagnosis yet is because how do we differentiate between the emotional
Mm-hmm.
side of burnout and depression? I don't know that we know yet.
No, I would agree with that for sure. Okay. Thank you for that. I was like, that sounds exactly like how I present when I'm in those, what I had been diagnosed with
Mhm,
depression along with
mhm.
anxiety and ADHD.
Yeah,
So it's just interesting for me to think about now because maybe it's not depression when that happens to me. Maybe it
yeah,
is the boredom burnout. So I'm just going to
yeah.
pay attention to that
I
from now
think
on.
how I would differentiate it for you is like is it, are you feeling that way because you genuinely don't have interest in the things that you are doing? Like, if you were to really dig into where that feeling of going through the motions is coming from, is it coming from a lack of interest or that you don't find the things that you're doing challenging? Or is it coming from a lack of engagement? Like, you are interested in that thing, but you can't get your brain to engage in it. Do you see the
Yes.
distinction that I'm trying to make
Yeah.
here?
I'll have to pay attention to that because I've always noticed the lack of interest I thought was a symptom of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like when that happens to me, I'm like, oh shoot, I'm in that place again. When I start to
Mm-hmm.
notice that like I just don't care or I'm not interested.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. So I'll have to start paying
Yeah,
attention to that.
that I would say is the way to differentiate between it because I feel like with depression, you could very much be interested in the thing that you're trying to do, but you can't seem to get yourself to be interested. And with boredom, I would say you're not. You're fundamentally just not interested,
Hmm.
but you're forcing it because you don't want to put in the work to try to find something that you are interested in.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Taking notes, taking
Good
notes.
questions. Good questions.
So now I think one of the biggest questions that I feel like our listeners are going to ask is, well, how do we navigate these
Mhm.
burnouts? Especially like emotional stands out for me a lot because like a lot
Yes.
of people listening have kids or, have so much that like overstimulation. The overstimulation in this population is fucking ridiculous. Like, don't talk to
Mhm.
me, don't touch me. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So what do we do then?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would actually almost say when I think of overstimulation, I don't think of emotional burnout. I actually think of overwhelm burnout.
True. Yes, you're right.
That's kind of more of where my brain goes when I think of overstimulation. But here's what I would say in terms of what to do about it. Firstly, we've got to kind of pinpoint what type of burnout is the driver type of burnout for you because I would say all burnout is not created equal. The things that you're going to do for physical self-care are very different than things that you're going to do for
Mhm.
emotional. Like it's very, very different. So that's step one. And then from there, what I talk through is I have a sustainable success framework because my goal with all the work that I do is I want to get you to the point where your lifestyle is burnout proof. Like you have created a lifestyle for yourself where you aren't going to be driving yourself toward burnout anymore. And fundamentally, this framework has 3 pillars: sustainable systems, sustainable self care, and sustainable mindset. And the reason why I think the sustainability is so important is I think we're all chasing like this elusive work life balance. I think balance is bullshit, especially how we tend to think about it. Like, let's be honest, you're not going to have a balanced day. Period. End of story. It's like for most of us, it is not possible for our waking hours to be balanced. Like work is going to monopolize way too much. And if you're not working remotely, you're going to have to tack on a commute on either side of that. Like that right there is going to take up 2/3 to 3/4 of your waking hours. So like we can't feasibly have a balanced day. For most of us, we can't feasibly have a balanced week because we're working 5 days a week. We only have 2 days to ourselves. And let's be honest, one of those days is usually dedicated to kind of like life
Housework.
maintenance
Yes.
activities. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Like, so you're not gonna have a balanced week. You might be able to have a balanced month if, for example, you're going on vacation for one of those weeks or something like that. But that's a big might. So really on these, like for us to have balance, we need to very much expand the time scale to not be like a month. It might need to be a quarter or 6 months or to have a balanced year. I summered very hard. Like I enjoyed my summer. So am I working my little booty off right now? Yes, ma'am. Yes, I am. But like the last 6 months have been pretty balanced in all respects. Like even though I am working a lot right now, they've been pretty balanced. So what I try to teach people to create instead of balance is sustainability. The goal needs to be, can I maintain the ways in which I'm living, the ways in which I'm taking care of myself, the ways in which I'm working? Can I maintain and sustain that for the long haul? And what I like about the framework is I feel like it hits those 4 types of burnout. Sustainable systems is designed to help you with the overwhelm side of burnout. If you have good systems, if you have good workflows, if you're, delegating to technology, if you can't delegate to a human, like, are you leveraging the tools around you to take things off of your plate, even if other people can't take things off of your plate? Like that might mean investing in a Roomba so you don't have to vacuum all of the time. It might mean like hiring somebody once a week to watch your kids so that you have the capacity to spend that time either taking care of yourself or working on some things that you need to get done. Like there's other ways that we can delegate that can take things off our plate. And that's really what the sustainable systems is about. Is I work with a lot of solopreneurs, so it's a lot of delegating to technology. So
Mhm.
that's that part. The sustainable self-care is really to help with the physical side. We all know what we need to do for physical. It's really not a matter of not knowing, it's a matter of not doing. And I think the reason why a lot of us don't do is because we get into this all or nothing mindset where we have like our morning routine has like 24 components and we judge ourselves like freaking crazy when we miss one of the 5 components of our morning routine. The ways in which we're thinking about self-care, especially for a lot of high achievers, are not sustainable. Like, what are you counting as movement? Maybe you need to loosen up your definition of what actually counts as movement. What are actually the non-negotiable parts of your self-care? And what are the like, oh, that would be nice parts of your self-care? So learning to think about self-care in a way that is more sustainable. Fundamentally, the only things that actually are truly non-negotiables for me is probably sleep, which I've been shitty at lately. I will fully acknowledge that. Sleep and like feeding myself. Like
Mhm.
fundamentally, those are really the only non-negotiables when it comes to self-care.
Mhm.
The other things are nice. Yeah, maybe getting a certain amount of steps is higher on the that would be nice to do list than going to the gym would
Mhm.
be. So
Yeah, I don't fuck
sustainability in
around
how
with
we approach
sleep.
self-care.
My husband knows I do
Yes.
not fuck around with sleep.
Yes. You know, it was one of the best investments I ever made in my sleep because I am somebody who, if my temperature is off, like my body temperature is off, I cannot sleep through
That's
it. Like if
me,
I'm too
yes.
hot or I'm too cold, I got
Mhm.
this thing called an 8 sleep. Have you heard of it?
No, tell me. I literally woke up too much last night because I felt too hot.
Yep. I woke up too much last night because I felt too cold. I got to turn my 8 sleep back up. So what it is, it's basically it's like a fitted sheet, and this sounds like a recipe for disaster, but I swear to you, it's not. It's a fitted sheet that goes over your mattress on top of like if you have like a mattress pad or something like that, it goes on
Mhm.
top of that. So it's this fitted sheet, and it's got tubes running through it that this machine pumps water through, and the water heats and cools according to your settings. And you can, since you're married, I'm single, but you can set the 2 different sides of the bed to be different. So if
Eight.
your husband likes to, it is an investment. I will tell you right now, it is
Mhm.
a $2,400 investment,
Cool.
but
Okay.
but they have very good financing plans. So I
Mm.
like chose the highest financing plan I could, like the most extended payment plan I could without interest being tacked onto it. I'm paying $100 a month for 2 years to pay this thing off. And I swear to you, if I had it for like a year and a half now, best investment I have ever made in my health because I sleep in the summer now. I used to not be able to sleep in the summer because AC is not normal in the Seattle area. And so I'll get too hot and I can't sleep. But like with this thing, like I just turn my 8 sleep down like a shit ton over the summer and suddenly I can sleep.
That's crazy. Because, yeah, I struggle with that so much. I'm the lightest
Mm-hmm.
sleeper. Like, if there a
Mm-hmm.
light comes on the kid's monitor, I'm awake.
Mm-hmm.
Everything wakes me up.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Noted. Christmas
Yeah,
list.
I have a discount code, $100 off. Let me
Nice.
know.
Perfect.
Um, subtle plug for Ellyn's discount code. But yeah, so sustainable self-care. And then the last one, which I think is the most important one, but it's also the one that I think is hardest for us to get to the point where we're ready for this sustainable mindset. And it's less about your mindset, more about your mindset sustaining you. Like when I talk about sustainable mindset, I'm talking about, do you know what your core values are? Because if you don't, and you aren't aligned with them in your work, in how you're spending your time, emotional burnout. Like it's going to happen no
Mm-hmm.
matter what. So, do you know your values? Do you know how you define success? Like, are you chasing this like insane like benchmark in your business, or you're chasing this promotion when the fact of the matter is the thing that you value the most is freedom to spend time the way you want to spend time? If that's the case, that is going to chain you to your desk and to your calendar, and you're not going to feel fulfilled by it when it happens. Like, so do you know your values? Do you know how you define success? Do you like what's your relationship with work, with money? What is like, oh, there was one that I wanted to say. Boundaries. How do you feel about boundaries? Do you think boundaries is a bad word? Like, is the people pleaser in you so terrified of driving other people away that you will never put yourself first? All of those things are really about our mindset. And that is the biggest reason why I think so many of us have recurrent burnout, is because we have done the self care, we've got the systems, but we're still working too fucking hard.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which
we don't
is
know how to
totally
stop.
normal because we were all
Yeah,
trained to do that. So, like, if you're
exactly.
sitting there thinking, like, oh my God, she's talking to me, what's wrong
Mm-hmm.
with me? There's nothing wrong with you.
There's nothing wrong with
This
you.
is
I've been a
literally what we were
validation
taught to
seeker.
do.
Exactly. I've been a validation seeker my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I actually hate that one of my love languages is words of affirmation because, once again, that's just a validation thing for me.
Oh my
Like, I
God.
am seeking validation in everything that I'm doing. Just tell me I'm doing a good job. Just give me the gold star. Like, I feel like the worst combination of like all of those like high achiever things. I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm a validation seeker. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I get it. Like, it's so programmed into us, especially as women.
Yes,
Especially
especially
as
as
women.
women. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So like that's a hard one. Like, I'm not sugarcoating the fact that that's really freaking hard to do. But if you can start to reprogram those beliefs that you have in your head, shift those mindsets, that's really fundamentally how we become burnout proof.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of us listening are probably in some sort of burnout. But
Mm-hmm.
even if we're not, like, why is this still important to catch before we get there? And how do we catch it?
Oh.
How do we even know? Like, when's the time to reach out to you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, so good. Thank you for asking this question. So I always say burnout's a spectrum. You can have very, very mild burnout that's very easy to recover from. And that's kind of where you start to see like, oh, I worked on Saturday and I generally don't like to work on Saturdays. I'm not going to do that. And you actually stick to that. Like, you actually stick to, for the most part, your self-care routines, like your work boundaries. You stick to that. And then maybe you have like a couple weeks or maybe a month where you've kind of fallen out of that, but you catch it, you realize it's not working, and you can easily recover. When we start to get to the kind of more moderate versions of burnout is when you've started to realize that you know that there's ways in which you want to operate in those self-care habits and those boundaries. They're in your head, you know that they're there, but when you reflect back on the last several months, several weeks, you start to realize that you have completely fallen off with those habits, and you're starting to feel it. You're starting to feel like you're starting to just snap at people. You're starting to notice more and more that your energy is tanking, and you are starting to notice the brain fog setting in, or that you're starting to feel that analysis paralysis set in. And you've started to realize that this is a pattern and it's been happening for a while. I would say that's the moderate version of burnout. That is where we need to take action. When we're in mild burnout, we haven't gotten to the point where we're so like crash and burn tired and like don't have any capacity to do anything else. We can fix it ourselves at that point. When we're in moderate burnout, that's really where we're going to start to need some outside help, some outside accountability, because when we are in stress, we default to our bad habits. And
Mm-hmm.
at that point, we are in stress and our bad habits have started to take over. But the difference between that burnout and very severe burnout is when we are in severe burnout, we are too burned out to do anything about our burnout. We are crashing and burning. We have no capacity at that point. And I think this is a mistake that I've been making, but don't worry, I'm fixing it, guys. Is I've been speaking to the people who are in severe burnout. But the fact of the matter is that's it's not too late. Like you can recover, but it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to recover once you're there because you don't have the capacity to do the things you need to do. So that middle, that sweet spot is what I would encourage people to take action. When you start to realize that those bad habits have started to become your norm, but you're also like, okay, I recognize this, but I don't know how to get back to where I was before. Hi, I'm Ellyn. I'm a burnout coach and I can help you.
Exactly. And that's really what you've learned from doing this is that you're like, oh shit, I need to catch these people before they get here.
Yes,
So we need to spread
yes.
the awareness, spread the message of the work before it has to become life or death, essentially.
Hmm. Exactly, exactly. And I feel like the my brain just went in a different place. I'm trying to bring it back. Come on, Ellyn, bring your brain back. But yeah, I think that's we need to start thinking about the work when it comes to burnout and stress as a proactive solution, a
Hmm.
preventative solution. Because when we get to severe burnout, it's kind of like there's things that we can do, yes, but it's kind of like we're trying to put a band-aid on a wound that is just gushing blood. It's not going to work. Like we're going to have to change that band-aid constantly. It's just not going to fix it. But when we are in that moderate burnout, it might be a kind of deep cut, but the band-aid's going to be fine. The band-aid and maybe some super glue is going to be fine at that point. And that's where we want to fix it before it starts gushing blood and we're bleeding out. Like that might be a graphic analogy, but sometimes that's what we need that's sometimes that's what we need to hear is because
Yes.
that's kind of the difference. Is a
Yeah.
band-aid gonna fix it? Maybe a big band-aid, like one of those mega ones that come in like maybe a big band-aid, is that gonna fix it? Or is this like we're getting to the point where we need surgery?
Yeah, well,
Because
that's what I was
that's
gonna
not the point we
ask
want to
is
wait
like
to.
if someone's listening and they're like, fuck, that's me. Like me a year and when was that? Was that 2 years ago? I don't even know. Like me then,
Mhm,
but what kind of help do they seek out then? If they're no longer in moderate, they're in severe. Do they still
mhm.
come to you, or is that when they like go to the doctors or a nutritionist or something like that?
Oh, that's hard to answer because it is definitely situational. And I will say going to the doctor or going to a therapist or somebody who does kind of mental health work can be helpful because what you can get from them is you can get a like literally like a doctor's note for work to go on stress leave.
Mm.
So it can be beneficial to do that. But here's the thing with going to a doctor, they can't do any follow-up support afterward. They can tell you what's wrong. They might give you some medication. They can tell you what's wrong and they can write you that doctor's note to go on stress leave, but they're not going to be able to sit there and hold your hand and help you work through this.
Hmm.
Something that I'm working on creating, and I'm realizing it can just be a very convenient tack on to my existing coaching programs, is kind of a like crisis package where we the little bit of work we're doing is like maybe one call where we help you look at all of the shit that's on your plate and figure out how to deal with it to just take that burden. So it's like a brain dump and a like and solutions all wrapped into one. So let's brain dump all of the shit that's on your plate, all the shit that you're struggling with, find ways to deal with all of it. And then we'll just spend the next several weeks where I'm just checking in on you. I'm kind of giving you nudges in the right direction. I'm making sure that like you're still doing those things and you haven't taken on more stuff. Like I'm just kind of a little like voice in the background, making sure that you're staying on track and that you're not taking on more things. And then when you've gotten to the point, because we don't like when we're at that stage, we don't need more stuff on our calendar.
Yeah,
We don't need
exactly.
like as much as we might
Yeah.
think, oh, I need somebody to talk to each week that's going to hold me on track. Like, do you? When you're at that point, it actually might be better for you to use that
Hmm.
time going on a walk or journaling or spending time with your kids or whatever it might be that's going to pour back into you and balance those cortisol levels and just start to make you feel like a human again.
Hmm.
And so then once you feel like a human again, I think this is the mistake a lot of us make. We don't want to just go back to life. Once you start to feel a little bit like a human again, that's when we step in and we do the real work. That's when we step in and start to set up your systems and start to create self care that you can actually maintain and sustain through the busy seasons and the chill seasons. And that's where we start to do that mindset work that's going to shift you away from feeling like you constantly need to do more because you don't feel like you're enough.
Mm-hmm. 1000%. Oh my God, this was so good. Thank you. So I feel like everyone's just like self-diagnosing themselves right now, but in like the healthiest way possible. This was so good. And you can tell how passionate you are about it too. Like the just the way that you speak about it, like you're obsessed with
Mm-hmm.
your work, which I,
I
I
am.
truly want everyone to feel that way about their work. So thank you for sharing it because you are clearly someone who is designed to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people reach out to you if they want to get to know your work more?
Oh, so I'm Coach Ellyn everywhere. Note that my first name is spelled weird. So it's Ellyn, but I'm Coach Ellyn everywhere. Like if you want freebies and to get plugged into like free events, go to coachellen.com. If you just kind of want to see like, is this actually my vibe in day-to-day life? Go to Instagram. I'm at Coach Ellyn. I'm kind of stepping back a little bit from posting on Instagram, but I love Instagram stories. Like Instagram stories are so fun. I just shared like 80 bajillion very funny reels like earlier today and last night because I was laughing my way through my evening. So like if you want to see like what my vibe is like, Instagram stories. And then if maybe you're not an Instagram human, but you are on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is another platform that I've been using a lot. I'm Ellyn Schinke. I'm not going to say how to spell my last name, but I'm going to give Adriana the link to my
Yeah.
LinkedIn.
All of her contact info will be in the notes below, so easily clickable. Yes.
Awesome.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing all of that wisdom. Even if they didn't get the science part, they most definitely will get everything else that we talked about. So thank you for sharing all that you know today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.